Hey, this is George back with the New Hunter's Guide, the YouTube channel and podcast helping new hunters get started and helping active hunters learn new things. Today I want to talk to you about deer meat and why it doesn't always taste great. Now I hear from new hunters or people who are sort of in the margins around the hunting universe that they don't like the taste of deer meat, that it tastes terrible, tastes gamey, has all these bad things. Well, there's a couple things you want to keep in mind. I've got 10 reasons why your deer meat tastes bad. But before we jump into that, you got to realize deer is not beef. It's not another animal. It's going to have a different, distinct flavor compared to other animals. That's not a bad flavor. Some people like that flavor more than other animals. But when you try to transform deer meat, cook deer meat, or think of deer meat as another animal, you're going to run into problems. But I assure you, deer meat can taste excellent. I've had many occasions where it tasted better than beef, but it's not beef, and sometimes beef tastes better. Take a bone-in ribeye steak. That's gonna taste amazing. There is no cut of deer meat that can compare to a bone-in ribeye, but there are many cuts of deer that can compare favorably to many other cuts of meat from other animals. So let's jump right into it. Number one, that deer was not at rest when it was shot. If the deer had just been running, if it had been stressed, if it had been a situation where it was heavily exerted and then you shot it, you have a lot of lactic acid that builds up in the meat. Once that deer gets shot, that acid is basically frozen in time in the meat and it can leave an off flavor, a gamey flavor, or it also make it a little tougher. Number two, you took a bad shot that caused that deer to run stressed for too long. It's the same effects of number one, it was just hunter-induced instead of situation-induced. This happens maybe more often in archery hunting, but a bad shot, one lung, nicked a lung, liver shot, and then it was jumped, spooked, so it ran, bedded down, ran again, just hours of running. It's just gonna cause, it can, not always, it never always occurs, but it can cause the similar effects as number one. Number three, that deer was gut shot or stomach shot. Now this could cause the same effect as number one and two, but it has a very different effect that I'm talking about here. Gut shot, you get all that grossness in the guts, inside the body cavity, just spread around. That can effectively season the meat, impart bad flavors to the meat, and ruin part of the meat. When that happens, there ought to be more meat discarded if that's the case. A stomach shot can do the same thing, although maybe to a more localized degree, not quite as bad. When you cut that deer open and it smells horrible, well, anything that horrible smell touches, it's going to impart a horrible taste, and that can lead to your deer meat not tasting good. Number four, that animal was not field dressed quickly enough or cleanly enough. I did a video about this in a few videos ago. You can check it out on a trophy hunter versus a butcher's opinion of when to recover a deer. I'm not going to jump into it all right now, but the bottom line is the longer that deer sits unfield dressed, especially when it's warm, you have gases begin to build up, bacteria begins to build up, things begin to break down, things begin to be released, and that can taint the meat. And that can taint not just the meat around the cavity, but that can spread quicker and further than you expect to other parts of the animal. And if you didn't do it cleanly enough, if you didn't get all the guts out, if you didn't get all the junk out, whatever junk you left in, whatever's that's touching or close by can be affected. Number five reason that your deer meat tastes bad, you did not get it into refrigeration fast enough. There's been lots of times where somebody shoots a deer at first light, especially on a warmer day, it's 50, 60 degrees, maybe warmer, throws it in their pickup truck, drives around town, shows everybody and their brother before they get that deer in the refrigeration near the evening. Guys, this can cause a spoilage, bacteria, all sorts of things that can affect the flavor and even the safety of the meat. Number sixth reason why your deer meat tastes bad, you did not hit the thumbs up button on this video. That'll do it. It'll happen every time. That'll get you. If you don't hit the thumbs up button on this video, that can definitely mess up your meat. No, really, that can't happen. But what can happen is other people's meat tastes bad because you didn't hit the thumbs up button to help this video get to more people and show them things that they can change to get better quality meat. The real number 6, that deer did not hang in refrigeration long enough. This has to do with aging the meat. A good butcher will let a deer hang 4, 5, 6, 7 days at 34 degrees Fahrenheit, let that meat break down, let the enzymes affect. The same thing we do with cows, the exact same thing that's done with beef for the exact same reason. It causes the meat to become more tender. It also causes the flavor to become more mild. Now, of course, if you get a gut shot and you've got all sorts of nastiness in there, and that nastiness just sits in there for another week, that doesn't help it, right? So you don't always want to hang your deer. And if you can't hang it at the right temperature, it's best not to hang it at all. You're better off processing it quickly and safely if you can't get it into a cooler at the right temperature. Number 7 reason your deer meat tastes bad: it was not packed, sealed, or frozen well. What'll happen here is if it's not vacuum sealed and it's in the freezer for 6 months, you're gonna get freezer burn. Even if it is vacuum sealed, eventually you can get freezer burn. But also, if you cut it up into pieces that are too small, if you cut your tenderloins up into itty bitty pieces, and you cut other things up too small, you're gonna get moisture loss if it's in the freezer cut up too small, or if it's not vacuum sealed properly, you will also get moisture loss. So that's gonna reflect how tough the meat is, that's gonna reflect the flavor of the meat, that's gonna give you a negative situation. Number 8 reason, your meat was not thawed properly. The best way to thaw deer meat is slowly under refrigeration. This maximizes moisture and tenderness. Now, if your meat is, if you take a steak out of the freezer and you run it under hot water for a half hour to thaw it out and cook it, you can do that. It's not necessarily unhealthy, but what you're gonna do is you're gonna have a piece of meat that's tougher, that is drier than if you thawed it under refrigeration over time. Now, ground doesn't seem to make as big of a difference as a steak or a roast or something else, but it's always advisable, thaw your meat in the fridge overnight or over several nights, depending on how large it is, to get meat that has the best tenderness and the best amount of moisture. Because let's face it, even if the meat does taste good, if it's super dry, you're gonna get more complaints. Number 9, that meat was soaked for days in stuff that tastes bad. Vinegar, buttermilk, brandy, on and on. Now, some people think buttermilk and other things help neutralizes the negative flavor of the venison. Guys, if the meat was cared for properly in the field, at the butcher, in the freezer, and now in your kitchen, you should not have bad, gamey, terrible taste that you need to try to kill with something else. A lot of times people are just trying to kill the flavor of deer, which is not a negative flavor. And you do not need to marinate your deer meat in anything, ever, not one time, unless those other 8 steps prior to this were done poorly or badly and you end up with meat that really tastes bad. Then you may want to do something like buttermilk or even regular milk to help neutralize the flavor that was imparted through all the bad things that could have happened. Not all necessarily your fault, but a lot of the things people soak deer in taste bad. Vinegar tastes bad. So if your meat tastes like vinegar, it's going to taste bad. All right, brandy. I have soaked meat in brandy and other liquors and things like that. Most of them leave the meat tasting bad. Okay, maybe a red wine's not going to hurt it. There's maybe a few other milder items that you can use. But a lot of things, they just leave a bad flavor, and that can cause it to be bad. Number 10, the meat was not prepared well. I think this happens too often, and it gets blamed on other things. The meat is overdone. It was just cooked too long. Deer meat should never be cooked beyond medium. Even medium well can be too far for a steak, for a lot of things. Unless you're doing a pot roast or a stew where the dish is designed to fall apart, you do not want to cook that meat for too long. If it's not sliced properly, if you slice it with the grain instead of against the grain, you're going to end up with tough or chewy meat. If you didn't tenderize a cut that should have been tenderized, a roast ought to be tenderized if it's going to be cut and served as a steak. You need to do that. If you didn't season it properly, if you put way too much seasoning or terrible seasonings or too much salt, or you didn't season at the right time, you can end up with bad flavor. And I could do a video just about the seasoning and maybe will in the future. Number 11, bonus for you guys. It was warmed up too much and for too long during the butchering process. You brought that deer home warm. You took you 6, 7, 8 hours to finally get through cutting it up. Not that it takes that long, but maybe you stopped. Maybe you're working on other things. You're eating lunch. The meat's sitting in the sun. It's sitting at room temperature in the kitchen, and it's just warm for too long. It can begin to cause spoilage, bacteria, which then creates and leaves other flavors. Number 12, bonus reason why your deer meat tastes bad, as it was frozen and thawed too many times. Now, usually this happens if you're hanging the deer outside overnight and in the morning. At night, it goes below freezing. In the morning, during the day, it gets too warm. Deer meat has a maximum frozen and thaw, just like pretty much any other meat, of 2 freezes. You get 2 total freezes before you begin to experience noticeable and then catastrophic quality degradation. Depends on how many freezes you do. 3, you can notice it. 4 is bad. 5 is terrible. So if that meat is frozen and thawed too many times, you're gonna end up with problems. But you get a maximum of 2 freezes. Usually after 2 freezes, I can't taste any difference. Most people can't taste any difference. But after the 3rd freeze and thaw, you absolutely can. So you get that deer home. If you're butchering it yourself, cut it up and get it in the freezer, done. If you take it to a butcher and they give it back to you, keep it in the freezer. Now, sometimes you get meat back in slices or pieces that are big. Maybe you get whole quarters back and they're come back frozen. It is okay to thaw them, cut them up, vacuum seal them, and then refreeze them. You get 2 freezes. But once they go back in for that 2nd freeze, they must never come out of the freezer again until you're ready to eat them. So guys, I hope this is helpful for you. Hit that thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button, forward this video to someone else, let somebody else know. Really appreciate it. Till next time, God bless you guys, and go get them in the woods.